You already know how it ends. A man and a woman climbing up out of the dark toward the light, so close to escaping death itself, and then, a single step from freedom, he turns to look at her and loses her forever. It is one of the oldest and most painful stories we have, and most of us only remember that one fatal glance. But the look back is the last page. The real story is about how a man came to be standing there at all, how far he was willing to walk into the land of the dead, what he was willing to do to undo the worst thing that had ever happened to him, and why, in the end, love itself may have been the thing that ruined him. So tonight you'll hear the full story of Orpheus and Eurydice, the greatest musician who ever lived, the wife who was taken from him, and the impossible bargain he struck with death to bring her back. If these are the kinds of stories you want more of, take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely keeps this channel alive, and tell me in the comments which myth you want to hear next. Now, settle in. To understand the man at the edge of the underworld, we begin in the green hills of Thrace with the sound of a song that nothing alive could resist. His name was Orpheus, and he was born for music the way other men are born for war or for the sea. The old stories say his mother was one of the muses themselves, the goddesses of art and memory, and that his father gave him a lyre and taught him to play, but no teaching could explain what Orpheus could do. When he sang, the world stopped to listen. Wild beasts lay down at his feet, forgetting their hunger. Birds left the sky to gather around him. The very trees were said to lean toward the sound, and rivers slowed in their beds so as not to miss a note. This was not simply a man who played beautifully. This was something closer to a power, a voice that could reach into anything alive, or even half alive, and move it. Kings wanted him at their feasts. Heroes wanted him on their voyages. But Orpheus, for all his gift, was not a man hungry for glory. He wanted what most people want, in the end, someone to share the quiet with. And then, in the hills of Thrace, he found her. Her name was Eurydice, and the old writers do not tell us much about her, only that Orpheus loved her completely, and that she loved him back, which for a man like Orpheus, who could have had the admiration of half the world, seems to have been the only thing that ever truly mattered. They married in the Thracian hills. Picture the kind of day it must have been. The whole countryside come out to celebrate. The man whose music could move stone, now playing only for joy, and the woman he had chosen walking beside him through the long grass and the late summer light. For a little while, the greatest musician who ever lived had everything he wanted, and it was enough. But the old stories have a cruelty in them, and they rarely let happiness stand for long. The marriage of Orpheus and Eurydice would last less than a single day. Because somewhere in that golden afternoon, as Eurydice walked through the meadow grass with her new husband's music still in the air, she did not see what was waiting in the grass at her feet. A viper, hidden in the long grass, struck her bare foot. It was a small thing, the kind of accident that happens 1,000 times in a summer. But the poison was quick, and there was nothing anyone could do, least of all a man whose only power was a song. Orpheus reached her in time to watch her die. The greatest voice in the world, the voice that could calm wild beasts and bend the will of rivers, could not call her back even one step from where she was going. And Eurydice was going to the only place all the dead go. Her shade slipped down, away from the warm meadow and the music and the man she had married only that morning, down through the dark, to the gray kingdom beneath the world where the rulers of the dead keep every soul that has ever lived. For a time, Orpheus simply stopped. The stories say his grief was so total that he could not eat, could not sleep, could only sit and play. But now the music had changed. It was no longer the sound that made the world lean closer in joy. It was something so full of loss that those who heard it wept and could not say why. And slowly, out of that grief, a mad and impossible idea began to take shape. No living person was ever meant to enter the kingdom of the dead. That was the one hard line the world drew. The dead went down and they did not come back, and the living did not follow. but Orpheus had decided to follow. Somewhere in the hills there was a cave, a deep black mouth in the earth that the old stories say led down and down, past the edges of the living world to the banks of the cold river that separates the dead from everything else. Orpheus walked into it with nothing but his lyre. He went down through the dark, deeper than any torch could reach, until the air turned cold and damp, and the last memory of sunlight was gone. And at last he came to the river, the wide black water that every soul must cross, where the grim ferryman carries the dead across and turns the living away. Orpheus could not pay the ferryman's price, and he had no right to cross. So he did the only thing he had ever known how to do. In that vast cold darkness, at the edge of the river of the dead, the greatest musician who ever lived began to play, and the underworld listened. The old writers describe something extraordinary, that the music of Orpheus, full of all his grief, did to the kingdom of the dead what it had once done to the living world, only deeper. The grim ferryman carried him across without payment. The great three-headed hound that guards the gate fell silent and let him pass. And as he walked through that gray land, the dead themselves gathered to listen, the countless shades drifting close, and for the first time in the long memory of that place, something moved them. The stories say the souls being punished forever paused in their torment. The ones rolling the boulder, the ones reaching for fruit they could never taste, the wheel of fire itself, all of it slowed and stilled and listened. And at the heart of that kingdom, on their dark thrones, the two rulers of the dead heard him coming. Hades, the grim lord of the underworld, and beside him his queen Persephone, who knew more than anyone what it was to be taken from the warm world against her will. Orpheus came and stood before their thrones, in the one place where music had never been heard, and he sang them the story of everything he had lost. What he asked for was something no one had ever been granted. He asked them to give her back. Not to cheat death, he said, not to escape it forever, only to let Eurydice live out the years that had been stolen from her, and to return to them, as everyone does, when her true time came. And then he waited, in the silence after the song. The old stories say that the impossible happened, that the cold rulers of the dead were moved. Some versions say Persephone, who spent half of every year in that gray kingdom against her will, could not bear it, and turned to her husband and asked him to say yes. And Hades, the grim lord who had never once bent the law of his own realm, looked down at the man who had walked alive into death for love, and granted his request. But there was a condition. Eurydice would follow Orpheus up the long dark road to the world of the living. But Orpheus must walk ahead of her, and he must not look back, not once, not for anything, until they had both stepped fully into the light of the sun. If he turned to look at her even a moment too soon, while any shadow of the underworld still touched her, she would be lost to him forever, and this time there would be no second chance. So they began to climb. Orpheus went first, up the long, dark road out of the kingdom of the dead, and somewhere behind him in the shadows came Eurydice, following the sound of his footsteps. And here, the old writers find the cruelest part of the whole story, because it was not the climb that was hard. It was the not knowing. Orpheus could not see her. He could not hear her, for the dead make no sound. He had only the word of the Lord of Death that she was there at all, somewhere in the dark behind him, and a single rule between him and everything he wanted: do not look back. Picture that walk. Every step up through the blackness, he is straining to sense her, and there is nothing, no footfall, no breath, no warmth at his back. And the doubt begins to work on him like poison. What if they tricked him? What if she was never given back at all, and he is climbing alone, about to walk out into the sunlight having lost her twice? What if she fell behind or took a wrong turn in the dark and is gone already? Mile after mile in that silence, with the one person he had crossed the world of the dead to save walking right behind him, unseen and unheard, his trust slowly came apart. And then at last he saw the light. Up ahead, the mouth of the cave and the pale glow of the living world spilling down into the dark. He was almost there. A few more steps, and it would be over. The grief, the descent, the unbearable silence. And they would walk out into the sun together, and she would be alive, and it would all have been worth it. And that is exactly where he lost her. The old writers say it was love that did it, as much as doubt. He was so close, and he had to know, had to see for himself that she was really there, that he had not walked all that way alone. So, with the sunlight already on his own face, with freedom one step away, Orpheus turned and looked back. And she was there. For one moment he saw her, his Eurydice, following him up out of the dark exactly as she had promised. But she had not yet reached the light. A single step still separated her from the living world, and that was enough. The stories say she did not even blame him. She simply slipped backward, drawn down again into the dark, reaching out toward him, and the last thing he ever heard her say was a single quiet word, "Farewell." And then she was gone, back into the kingdom of the dead, and this time the door was closed for good. He tried to go back down. Of course he did. But the road that had opened for him once would not open again. The grim ferryman turned him away, and this time the music could not change it. Orpheus sat at the edge of the river of the dead for 7 days, they say, refusing to eat or drink, and when at last he understood that there was no second chance, he climbed back up into a world that no longer had anything in it for him. He wandered the wild hills of Thrace, playing a music so full of sorrow that the stones themselves were said to weep. He turned away from every comfort and every person who tried to reach him, and that withdrawal in the end is what killed him. The old stories say he was set upon and torn apart by a frenzied band of women whose celebrations he would not join. But here, the myth offers one small, strange mercy. When his head was lost to the river, it is said to have gone on singing as it drifted, calling Eurydice's name. And down in the kingdom of the dead, the two shades found each other at last. Now, the old writers say, Orpheus may look back at Eurydice as often as he likes, because this time, there is nowhere left for either of them to fall. For all the times this story has been told, we usually shrink it down to a single warning: don't look back. But the older telling is sadder and stranger than a lesson, because it never really tells us that Orpheus was wrong. He had walked alive into the kingdom of the dead. He had moved the unmovable, melted the cold hearts of the rulers of the underworld, and won back the one thing no one is ever allowed to win back. And then, a single step from the sunlight, the very love that had carried him all that way, the need to see her to be sure to not be alone, was the thing that undid him. That is the cruelty the old writers understood. The condition the gods set was not really a test of his music or his courage. It was a test of his trust, in the dark, with no proof and everything to lose, and it asked of him the one thing grief makes almost impossible: to believe she was there when he could not see her. Maybe that is why we have kept this story for 3,000 years. Not because of the warning, but because every one of us, sooner or later, knows what it is to want so badly to look back, and to learn, too late, what it costs. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.